Hi, this is Hyperwave. I'm Leah Wald, and I'm here with Tyler Jenks. And today is Sunday. So I ran back from the dog park. I have a dead puppy in the background. I don't know if you can tell, but it's because today is really exciting if you've been following the price action. So Tyler titled this very interestingly, which he's going to talk about in a second, which is the charge of the Light Brigade, right? So if anyone's familiar with Alfred Lord Tennyson, yeah, it didn't end all that well for them, but hopefully Tyler's going to give us a little better news, and we won't be the British, but maybe we will. So no spoiler alert. So today's episode, I don't know how much everybody's been following, but that's what these are for. We came really close to the Hyperwave Phase 3 line, and we had this huge rally from 8,300 to 9,600, all in today's action, which is enormous. But that's just the good stuff. So the bad stuff is that we're only just at 9,600 right now, last time that we checked. So we're really not back at the 10,100 line or the 11,100 line, which means that even with this awesome run up, we're still in danger. So Tyler, what's going on?
Great. Thank you, Leah. As Leah said, this is a very, very interesting, important day. I've been sending a number of tweets out using metaphors, as I often do. And I couldn't really come up with the best metaphor. I started thinking about Steelers Wheel, who wrote that funny song. Some people thought it was funny, about being stuck in the middle with you, clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. When you're on a chart of anything, you always move from the left to the right because the time scale is on the bottom. So every day what happens is when a new daily candle is made, you move one step more to the right, and you keep doing that forever, basically. So sometimes you find yourself in a position like we are today where everything, if you put yourself in the place of price, everything to your left is above you and everything to your right is below you. And sometimes you get stuck in the middle, in which no matter what happens, it's not good. If you go up higher, you run into resistance. If you go down lower, you're losing value. And in this case of Hyperwave, we came very close on 2 different days, today earlier and 2 days ago earlier, down at 8,300. At that point, we were only 400 points away from breaking the Phase 3 line. And this is important because this is Sunday. Sunday means at 8 o'clock tonight, we will post the weekly close on Bitcoin. And if that weekly close happened to be below 7,900, just 400 points more than where we were earlier today, that would give a sell signal on Hyperwave. So in all of that, I'm going to go to screen share with a very clean screen, no lines on it, no Fibonacci's, no stop and reverse points, just a clean price chart. And we are going to build step by step the resistance to our left that I see in the valley of death, as Lord Tennyson talked about. Because we have so much resistance to get through. And after this wonderful run up today from below 8,500 all the way to 9,700, we haven't even begun to work our way through the overhead resistance. So let's do that. I'm going to go to screen share. We're going to pull up a chart of the action, and I will try to explain it as best I can. So here we are looking at the price. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger to take us back on the upper left to the top of 19,666. And the first thing we'll do is we'll draw the downtrend line from the peak. We are in a downtrend. I keep saying that. And until that line is broken successfully and we hold above it. Now, you know, if we switch this to a linear, from a linear to a logarithmic, watch what happens to the line. We get this curve off the line that we already had, which means that if we get rid of that line and just go directly to a log, I'm having trouble with my mouse. Here we go. Now that's the same chart we just looked at, but now we are looking at a log function, and it looks like what we did is we came up to that line and then broke down from it. But I use linear trend lines in all of my hyperwave work. I have tried semi-log, log, linear. I've tried open, high, low, close bars. I've tried candles. I've tried exponential moving averages and moving averages. I've tried stochastic RSI and RSI. And I've come to the conclusion many years ago, and I keep revisiting it, that the most significant use of trend lines with hyperwave analysis are the linear. And I've had a bunch of people ask me in the last couple of days why that is, and I have no good reason other than the hundreds and hundreds of these things that I've looked at. When you think about it, hyperwave is very, very simple. There's just 7 phases, but then it starts getting very complex. Going up isn't too bad. 1, 2, 3, 4 is fairly clear cut. But 5, you start dropping. And then 6, you go back up again. And depending on how you do those things, it starts getting very murky where you are. So you need to have a compass. And the compass that I use is an inviolate rule, which says you cannot close below any trend line, hyperwave phase line, on a weekly closing basis without invalidating that line. And I got a lot of examples of cases where on a log scale, you get a different result than you do on a linear scale. And when I look at all the results on the breaking of a phase line, the majority of times where it has been effective has been using the linear. So this is the line I'm going with. And what you see here is we broke above it, and I got all excited, as did many other analysts. If you remember a tweet that I sent out. I said, everything is looking good and everybody is bullish and we've all got upside targets. What can go wrong? Because usually when everybody is saying the same thing, even though they're using a number of different systems, something is being overlooked. And unfortunately, what happened is after the breakout, we gave it all up, fell back below the trend line, and we've been back below that trend line for the last 4 days. Now, with the activity today that Leah described, which was a run from the lows down at 8,400 with some time sequences. Others had it as low as 8,340. And on various exchanges, Bitfinex had it at different levels. One of the big things you've got to keep in mind when you're talking about trend lines is what exchange are you talking about? Because all of the exchanges tend to diverge at various times. Tone Vays talks often about what we need more than anything else in this Bitcoin culture is one index that we can use across all exchanges. But until we get more ETFs and other things, that's going to be difficult. So anyway, here we are with the first line, the most important line other than the Hyperwave Phase 3 line, which tells us we are still in a downtrend. We have been for 3 months. We still are. And we've tried to break out right here. We came back. We tried and succeeded in breaking out for about 7 days right here and then dropped back below it. And then it looked like we were going to drop to all-time lows, maybe as low as 59.20 or below, but then had this wonderful turnaround hammer 3 days ago. We didn't do too badly yesterday, and then we got this unexpected but very welcome pop right here. Okay, let's start building the other trend lines. I'm going to put one as close to 10.1 as I can. That looks good enough. This line, I identified all the way back at 10,000 before we doubled up to 20,000. At the time, I didn't realize how significant it was. One of the great things about horizontal trend lines is it doesn't matter what you use, linear or logarithmic, because it doesn't move. Not only that, but because it doesn't move, it defines areas above and below it in very stark terms. And what you often find with a horizontal trend line is all of these touches that take place with tails that either go below it and then reverse the action, or come right down to it over and over and over again, close right on it, tail goes above it, close right on it, tail above it, tail above it, tail above it, etc., etc., etc. And each week that goes by, as you get closer to that line, it becomes evident how important that line is. And that will continue into the future as long as we stay in this realm of 10,000. Below it, it obviously becomes a lot less important. Above it, it becomes a lot less important. But right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to cross from below it to above it, just as we crossed from above it to below it. So it becomes a very important area of support and resistance. Right now, it's our next target in terms of resistance that we've got to get through. So now let's put the next one on that I talk about all the time, which is the 11,100 area. And I will use that as the line. Now, the other line at 10,100, $1,000 less, define the bottoms of a lot of these candles. This one is defining the tops or the closing areas or midpoints of a number of these other candles. So I'm going to take that one off now. And now what I want to do is I want to look at these peaks. The peak on this day was 11,780. And we attempted to get over it not that long ago. We got up to 11,384. The high was 11,688. Didn't quite do it. And so that becomes an important top that we must take out, about 700 to 800 points higher than my 11,100 line. So now we've got three different lines: the downtrend line, the 10,100 line, and the 11,100 line. But we've got tops over here that come in somewhere around the, let's call it 12,000. 13,052 on that particular candle, and the next one closed or opened just about at the same area. So somewhere around 13,000. Then we break into the clear up in this territory. There's almost nothing here. There's some tops around 14,000. But in any case, going from this trend line, which we may today close above, on, or slightly below, then 10,100, about 500 points, 400 points higher, then 11,100. And then we've got to think about moving averages, because here is a 50-day moving average, and it's coming in right around the 10,000 level. So besides the 10,100, we've got a 50-day moving average that we broke below again after breaking above, and we're now below it. So I'm going to take that off now too. I don't want to clutter this up, but mentally, as you are looking at a chart and seeing where is the line of least resistance, up or down, we're stuck in the middle between these bottoms at 5,900, the trend line for the hyperwave, which we'll talk about in just a second. It comes in right around 7,900 this week and just about 8,100 next week. And I want to make some comments about that because we've had so many questions, maybe 50 in the last 2 or 3 days from listeners. Okay, but we're still not done, because then we have to take a look at the Fibonacci retracements. And I'm going to do that on a larger chart when I'm talking about hyperwaves. And that's what we're looking at now. So this is a weekly chart. We just looked at a daily chart. And on this weekly chart, I've got just two lines, both below the price action right now. The one that's lower, and I did have some comments by two individuals that they had reconstructed the phase 2 line, and their observation was that it didn't really work because it had been violated on two different occasions. Remember, the violation only takes place on a weekly close. So here is the way I've drawn the phase 2 line. If anybody wants to jot it down, I'm starting the phase 2 line the week of March 19th of last year, 2017. And that line begins at the base of the red doji on a weekly chart on that week. And then you'll see that it comes to the bottom of the next candle. It comes to the bottom of the wick of the next candle, the bottom of the wick of the next candle, just about the open of the next candle, the bottom of the wick of the next candle. That is a great runway for a phase line to begin. And notice that there are no closes in that 7-week period below. Then when price began running up all the way from 890 to over 2,800, we then came back and tested that line twice. Once with a close on the red candle slightly above the line and the wick right on it. And the next candle, a reversal to the upside that started a very big run up. We had a close or an open, right on the trend line and closed well above it. And never after that point is there anything that comes close to the phase 2 line. Here's the drop that we had the week of February the 4th of this year, but that only got down to 5,900. And at the time, the phase 2 line was well below that at 3,500 approximately. So that phase 2 line is valid. It meets all the requirements of a hyperwave phase line with nothing breaking below it on a weekly basis. So let's take a look at the one that we're all talking about, the phase 3 line. It's so easy on this chart to conclude that this was the phase 4, this is the phase 5 down, phase 6, and we're in a phase 7. I concluded that myself. I sold positions personally and for family members up between 14 and 17,000 on this red candle, with the thought that it looked like it was gaining steam and it was probably a 5, then into a 6, and then into a 7. But the more I studied these charts and remembered the Dow Jones charts that I've shown you, those that have been watching, the Dow Jones Industrials did a very similar thing in 1987 with a crash that was 22% in one day. And at the time, I was able to call that crash a week before because the price had violated what I deemed to be a 4th phase trend line. It turned out, though, that after the crash, we never got lower. Instead of going back to the beginning and breaking a 3 and a 2, we kept going up, and we formed a much bigger hyperwave following the first one. So early on in this downtrend that we've been in, I started thinking that because hyperwave is the largest I have seen in terms of amplitude and speed with which it has gained that amplitude, and its tendency in the early years back in 13 and 14 to have these wild moves up that looked almost like hyperwaves. Very similar. We've had 2 or 3 people send us overlays of this movement and where we are today. And it's very possible that Bitcoin, because of what it stands for and its potential as a massive hyperwave, has this ability to nest within it its own hyperwaves. And that would be my explanations for the earlier one. So even though we ran from 1,000 to 20,000 very quickly, I began thinking, what if this action is simply coming down to find support at a earlier phase wave, such as a 3, and we never had entered a 4. Therefore, we never entered a 5. Therefore, we never entered a 6. That is still part of phase 3. Now, I've also shown you on the chart of GBTC that GBTC is clearly in a phase 2, not a phase 3. So I've been getting questions. Does a break of phase 3 mean that this hyperwave is over? And my answer is probably. However, if we simply come back to phase 2, where GBTC is hanging right now, and hold there, then we weren't even in a phase 3. We've been in a phase 2 all along, like the Dow Jones Industrials from 1988 all the way to the year 2000. 12 years went by in a phase 2, and then we began to accelerate up towards the end of the 2000s.
Tyler?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So we actually got a great question from the live chat based specifically on what you're talking about right now. The question was, why did phase 2 end so quickly? Shouldn't it have lasted several months after being in phase 1 for so long? So if you just want to continue to elaborate a little bit more.
Brilliant observation. And the thing that concerned me about the phase 2 line, when you get something as volatile as this asset class, you begin to question a lot of things. I've drawn the phase 1 and phase 2 20 different times over the past year and a half until I settled on this one. And the reason I settled on this one, quite frankly, was this action that took us down to the phase 3 line. The phase 3 angle to me looks more like a phase 2. It's less than 45 degrees on a linear chart. And this phase 2 line is barely moving up. GBTC seems to make the same observation, but in real time, because it is mimicking this, and the line looks better from an angular point of view than what I've got drawn here as a phase 2 line. But again, any of the angles and the lengths of lines on the hyperwaves where I show in this chart are all averages or means or medians, sometimes all 3, sometimes just 1 or 2, of all of the examples I've looked at. So the angle here is the one that I normally see in a hyperwave. Something approaching 45 degrees, and then something approaching something much greater than that. between well, something greater than 45 and less than 90, basically. And even the phase 4, this is actually, in some examples of hyperwaves, conservative. They literally go straight up, or as literally you can with a scrolling time across the bottom. But sometimes in the first 3 or 4 or 5 days of a 4, you're going almost vertical, and then you move to the right for a period of time, then vertical again. So, great question. I agree with the observer that the phase 2 line is really short. But then what do you say about this unbelievable move from 7,000 to 20, 300% in 5 weeks? Bitcoin is special. I am convinced of that. But special has got all kinds of meanings. And one of the meanings that we're going to have to live with is it throws all kinds of possibilities out that it is not going to match the mean, median, average of other previous hyperwaves. It is probably going to do something that we're going to have to watch and consider and think about as it develops. All I know is that right now, when you get evidence like this, where you are in a free fall and you break sharply hundreds of points below a line that has been constructed using my methodology, and then it rubber bands back before the close and starts off a month-long attempt to get away from that line, that is significant to me. That makes the line significant. We did it again this week. We came all the way down very close to the line. Now, one of the points I wanted to make today, and we've answered a couple of them having to do with trend lines in general, but an upward sloping trend line in the early stages of a hyperwave has all kinds of very important implications, not just as a trigger mechanism to get out of a trade. Now, what I mean by that is, let's just go over here to early June, late May, early June. Right now, the cursor is approximately on June the 3rd. This trend line comes in at 10,000, which is higher than our price is right now. And obviously, what is going to happen over time as you move out into time, we'll take a look at as far as this will go, which is August 19th of 2018. By August, this trend line's at 12,000. Well, why is that significant? If you remember, about a month ago, I said what I'm hoping here is that this formation begins to go flat. Instead of being volatile up and down, it begins to flatten out. And the reason for that is it gives time for price to find strong support along an upward slanted trend line. And if you simply walk up this trend line, guess what's going to happen? All of those resistance areas that I've defined, 10,100, 11,100, 12,500 fall away simply by going sideways up this line. And you can eat into that overhead resistance without having to run hundreds and hundreds or thousands of dollars up to meet the resistance. So I am not particularly anxious at this point because we're at 9,500 now. So we have got $1,600 above our price and our trend line, the Hyperwave trend line, the number 3, the phase line. So I wanted to make those observations so people can begin to picture what I think is happening here. I still believe we're in a phase 3. I still believe we're going to move up through this resistance one way or the other. But unfortunately, in terms of the immediate future, meaning days, we need to close above the downtrend line from the top, and we're sitting right on it by 5 hours from now at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to post that candle. And if we can get that candle to post a close above the line, that would set us up next week, starting tomorrow, starting tonight at 8:01, to build on that and use this as a floor to start taking on 10,100, the moving average, which we said came in, the 50-day moving average coming in right about 10,000, the 11,100 horizontal trend line. And all we're talking about now are very simple lines, very simple things. We're not getting into details about sequential or about moving averages, crossing, death crosses, and all the rest. I'm going to do a whole vlog on the use of 3 trend lines, a very short-term one, which I usually do 14-period trend line, and then a 50 and a 200. And the interaction of those 3 trend lines can be a very powerful tool. And we actually came up with a trading system for ETFs where we traded 40 different ETFs every day, either long or short, based on one simple tool, which is the interaction of those 3 lines. We were doing minute lines, and so 200-minute, 50-minute, and 14-minute. And we spent 2 years studying that, and they can be very powerful. I've started applying it to the Bitcoin world. I haven't really talked about it before, but that will be coming up in another vlog, a very important tool along with the Hyperwave tool. So that's enough for now. We've covered an awful lot of things, answered a couple of your questions directly and indirectly from Twitter. And thank you very much for watching. Stay up, watch the 8 o'clock close. I'm going to be watching it tonight to see if we can move up and through some of this resistance. I would not expect to do all of them in one fell swoop, but, and this is a very big but, I am very impressed with the ability of this price to confuse both the bulls and the bears. We were looking very bearish over the last 6 days. And the fact that we had tried to break up through this trend line and couldn't do it, and pulled back and then did break and then fell back, is a very negative pattern. But then for us to be able to turn around this quickly and stay above these important hyperwave phase lines below us gives me some sense that we could be building here in the next 7 trading days the ability to blast through all of these upside targets. And I like saying that today because almost no one else is saying that. I'm not always a contrarian, but it seems with Bitcoin that that's not an unwise way to proceed. So with that, I'm turning it back over to Leah.
Sounds good. All right, a bit of a summation, right? We have crossed back above the downward trend line from the top of 19,666. Now we need to stay there. Belief that we will be satisfied if we stay below the 10,100 and above the 9,700. Tyler was talking about this in tweets earlier. By the close of 8 p.m. tonight, Eastern Standard, everybody remember it was daylight savings. But we're still in dangerous territory. So finishing off, Charge of the Light Brigade. At least what the poem means to me is a celebration of patriotism, heroism, and the fearless nature of many brave English soldiers. So half a league, half a league, half a league onward, I believe, to at least our next trend line. So we have further to go, but onward, hopefully we charge upward towards that as well. Thanks everybody so much. Hopefully see you tomorrow on Tone's morning Bitcoin brief. And thanks to everybody for watching our channel today.
Very good. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.